the last month, 6 weeks, I've been reading this book, Trauma and the Soul, by Donald Cowshed. And what I found was that it's been quite a revelation to me reading this book. Prior to this, I was reading Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. So in this book, what we have is that I came up with a story. I didn't come up with a story. There was a story, and it was a bit of a crescendo in the book. So what I'm going to do my best. I don't know how many people are watching here right now, but what I'm going to do is read a little bit of a story that I really wanted to do this evening. It's very late here in London, but I'm going to read a bit of this story, and maybe it's about 6 pages of A4, and hopefully for anybody that's going to get to play this back, I can relate to this story because of my own life story, and it's a bit of a heavy story, and it was written in 1812 by let's see, I should know this off by heart, by the brothers Grimm, and that's Grimm, and they were brothers that wrote stories. So pre, television, and before, laptops and computers and all of that, people would have been coming up with stories, and pre-psychotherapy as well, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, people would have been speaking on stories and metaphors, and life would have been about stories, and each of our lives is a story, if you think about it. And when we meet with other people, when we merge with anybody we meet, like, if we go into a coffee shop or we have a relationship or friendship, basically what we're doing is we're merging with each other as souls and our stories. And through our stories, there can be healing and understanding and wisdom. So, it's quite unique. Each of us have our own story. So I'm going to continue reading this that's in the book. It's a crescendo to me, but I'm not going to explain where it is in the book, because if you do get this book, which I'm going to show you again, and the link will be below, which is Trauma and the Soul. If you do actually get this book, then you're going to come across this story, and you can also find this story online. And I'm just going to read it, and I'm going to relate it back to my own life, of how I understand this. So if we just recall, it was written in 1812. And basically, here we go. And if you bear with me, if you've got any questions as I go, I'm happy to answer them. So basically, 1812, so get this. So a miller, meaning a miller, a man, a miller, fell slowly but surely into poverty, until finally he had nothing more than his mill and a large apple tree which stood behind it. One day he had gone into the forest to gather wood, where he was approached by an old man, whom he had never seen before, and who said, "Why do you torment yourself with chopping wood? I will make you rich if you promise me that which is standing behind your mill." So the mill would have been a house, if you can imagine, like I guess like a wooden house in those times. And he said, "What can that be but my apple tree?" So the miller thought, "What can that be but my apple tree?" Thought the miller. Said yes, and he signed over to a strange man. He signed it over to a strange man because he was basically, this old strange man said he wanted what was behind the mill. So he goes on. He says, the latter, however, laughed mockingly and said, "I will come in 3 years and get what belongs to me." And then he went away. When he arrived home, the miller, his wife came up and said to him, "Miller, tell me, where did all this wealth come from that is suddenly in our house? And all at once, all of the chests and all of the boxes are full, and no one brought them here, and I don't know where they all came from." He answered, It came from a strange old man whom I met in the woods, who promised me great treasures if I would sign over to him that which stands behind the mill. We can give up the large apple tree for all of this, because as far as he was concerned, the miller was The only thing that was behind the mill was the apple tree. And the wife said, "Oh, husband," said the woman, terrified, "that was the devil. He didn't mean the apple tree, he meant our daughter, who was just standing there behind the mill, sweeping the yard." The miller's daughter was a beautiful and pious girl, and she lived for 3 years worshipping God without sin. When the time came up and the day came when the evil one was to get her, she washed herself clean and drew a circle around herself in chalk. And the devil appeared very early in the morning, but he could not approach her. Whoever's watching there, I hope you're bearing with me. I've got one viewer and I'm quite happy with that. And let's see, he spoke to the miller. "Keep water away from her so she cannot wash herself anymore, otherwise I have no power over her." The miller was frightened and did what he was told. The next morning the devil returned, but she had wept into her hands, and they were entirely clean. Thus he could not approach her, and he spoke angrily to the miller. He said, "Chop off her hands, otherwise I cannot get to her." And the miller was horrified and answered, "How could I chop off my own child's hands?" Then the evil one threatened him, saying, "If you do not do it, then you will be mine, and I will take you yourself." This frightened the father, and he promised to obey him. Then he went to the little girl and said, "My child, if I do not chop off both of your hands, then the devil will take me away. And in fear, I have promised him to do this. Help me in my need and forgive me for the evil that I am going to do to you." So I'm going to stop there. So in childhood trauma, we can imagine the evil that some parents have acted out on their children. And whatever reasons this happens for in society, it does happen. So I'm going to read on. She answered, "Dear father, do with me what you will. I am your child." And with that, she stretched forth both hands and let her father chop them off. If we think about it as children, we don't have a voice, and whatever our parents say or do, or adults, we go along with it. We don't have a choice. Reading on. He says, "The devil came a third time, but this time she had wept, the young girl, so long and so much onto the stumps that they were entirely clean. Then he had to give up and lost all claim to her. The miller spoke to her, "I have gained great wealth through you. I shall take care of you in splendor as long as you live." Now you remember this, the father chopped off the young girl's hands. And this story is 1812. So sorry if it sounds scary, but these stories would have been quite deep during that time. And she answered him, she said, "I cannot remain here. I will go away. Compassionate people will give me as much as I need." Next page. Then she had her mutilated arms tied to behind her back, and at sunrise she set forth, walking the entire day until it was night. She came to a royal garden, and by the light of the moon she saw that inside there were trees full of beautiful fruit, but she could not get inside, for there it was surrounded by water. Having walked the entire day without eating a bite, she was suffering from hunger, and she thought, "Oh, if only I were inside that garden so I could eat all of the fruits, otherwise I shall perish." Then she kneeled down, and crying out to God, the Lord, she prayed. Suddenly an angel appeared, and he closed the head gate so that the moat dried up, and then she could walk through. She entered the garden, and the angel went with her. She saw a fruit tree with beautiful pears, and they had all been counted. She stepped up to the tree, and she ate it with her mouth, enough to satisfy her hunger, but no more. And the gardener saw what happened, but because the angel was standing by her, he was afraid and thought the girl was a spirit. And he said nothing to her and did not dare to call out or speak to the spirit after she had eaten the pear. And then she went and lay down by the bush. The king who owned the garden came the next morning, and he counted the fruit on the trees and saw that one of the pears was missing. He asked the gardener what had happened to it. It was not lying under the tree, but had somehow disappeared. And the gardener answered, "Last night a spirit came here it had no hands, and it ate one of the pears with its mouth. And the king said, how did the spirit get across the water? And where did it go after it had eaten the pear? Bit of a story here, hey? Continuing reading, he said, the gardener answered, someone dressed in snow white came from the heaven and closed the head gate so the spirit could walk through the moat. Because it must have been an angel, I was afraid, and I asked no questions, and I did not call out. After all, the spirit had eaten the pear, it went away again. The king then said, if what you say is true to me, I will keep watch with you tonight. And after it was dark, the king entered the garden, bringing a priest with him, who was able to talk to the spirit. All three sat down under the tree and kept watch. At midnight, the girl came creeping out of the bush, stepped up to the tree, and again ate off a pear with her mouth. And an angel dressed in white was standing next to her. The priest walked up to them and said, have you come from God or from another world? Are you a spirit or are you human? And she answered, I am not a spirit, but a poor human who has been abandoned by everyone except God. And you can see there that she was abandoned in the respect that her father had chopped off her hands and allowed the devil to, make claim to her. And she had no one, because when a parent does that, it's very damaging. And then all of the comfort and the compassion, you can't trust the people that have done that to you. So she felt abandoned by everyone except God. And the king said, even if you have been abandoned by the whole world, I will not abandon you. He took her home with him to his royal castle. And because she was so beautiful and pure, he loved her with all of his heart, and he had silver hands made for her and took her as his wife. After a year, the king had to go out into the battlefield, and he left the young queen in care of his mother, saying, if she has a child, support her and take good care of her, and immediately send me the news in a letter. She gave birth to a beautiful son. The old mother quickly wrote this in a letter, giving the joyful news to the king. I'm enjoying this story. I've read it 3 times in the last couple of days, and I posted it on my Facebook page, and it is meaningful, and I'll tell you why a bit more in a moment. He says, now on the way, the messenger stopped at a brook to rest. Tired from his journey, he fell asleep. Then the devil came up to him. He still wanted to harm the pious queen, and he took the letter, putting it in the place one had stated that the queen had brought, a challenging into the world. When the king read the letter, he was frightened and saddened, but nevertheless he wrote an answer that they should take care of the queen until his return. The messenger returned with this letter, but he rested at the same place and again falling asleep. The devil came again and placed a different letter in the bag. This letter said they should kill the queen with her child. You can see there's more trauma in the story. The old mother was terribly frightened when she received the letter. She could not believe it had been written by the king, that it had been wrote to the king again, but she got back the same answer, because each time the devil substituted a false letter, and the letter even stated that they should keep the queen's tongue and eyes as proof. The old mother lamented that such innocent blood was to be shed, and in the night she had a doe killed, cut out his tongue and eyes, and had them put aside. Because what's going on here, she's got to prove to the devil or to the king that there is, the queen has been killed, and the queen is the one who's got the silver hands, who's been through all of this abuse by her family. And the queen then she said to the queen, I cannot have you killed as the king has ordered, but you can no longer stay here. Go out into the world wide with your child and never come back. And the old mother tied the queen's child onto her back, and poor woman went away with weeping eyes. She came to a great forest. She came to a great forest wild forest where she got onto her knees and prayed to God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to her and led her to a small house. On it was a small sign with the words, "Here everyone can live free." A snow-white virgin came from the house and said, "Welcome, Queen," then led her inside, and she untied the small boy from her back, held him to her breast so he could drink, and then laid him in a beautiful made-up bed. Then the poor woman said, "How did you know that I am Queen?" The white virgin answered, "I am an angel sent by God to take care of you and your child." She stayed in the house for 7 years and was well taken care of, and through the grace of God and her own piety, her chopped off hands grew back. Now this is quite a big thing in the story, because if you remember, her father chopped off her hands, and because of the devil was doing a bad deal, and now she's been sent out and lost her marriage to the king because she's basically the devil intercepted letters. So this story is quite deep. I don't know if the person watching there gets this, but I'll keep reading. I've got 2 more pages to read. So she stayed in the house for 7 years and was well taken care of, and through the grace of God and her own piety, her chopped off hands grew back. So get this, her chopped off hands actually began to grow and reform and grow back. And the king finally came home from the battlefield, and the first thing he wanted to do was see his wife and his child. Then the old mother began to weep, saying, "You wicked man, why did you write to me that I must put 2 innocent souls to death?" And she showed him the 2 letters that the devil, the evil one, had counterfeited. Then she continued to speak, "I did what you ordered," and showed him proof she kept the eyes and the tongue as proof. But it wasn't of the queen, it was of a deer or a dove. Then the king began to weep even more bitterly for his poor wife and his little son, until the old woman had mercy and then said to him, "Be satisfied that she is still alive. I secretly had a doe killed and took the proofs from it. I tied your wife's child onto her back and told her to go into the forest, into the wide world, and she had to promise never to come back here because you were so angry with her." Then the king said, "I will go far as I can. The sky is blue and will neither eat nor drink until I have found my dear wife and my child again, provided, and in the meantime, they have not died or perished from hunger." Then the king traveled about nearly 7 years, searching in all the stone cliffs and caves, but he did not find her, and he thought that she had perished. He neither ate nor drank the entire time, but God kept him alive. He came to a great forest where he found a little house with a sign containing the words, "Here, anyone can live free." And the white virgin came out, took him by the hand and led him inside and said, "Welcome, king," and then asked him where he had come from. He answered, "I have been traveling around for nearly 7 years looking for my wife and my child, and I cannot find them." And the angel offered him something to eat and drink, but he did not take it, wanting only to rest. He lay down to sleep, covering his face with a cloth. And then the angel went into the room where the queen was sitting with her son, whom she normally called filled with grief. And the angel said to her, "Go to the next room with your child, your husband has come." She went to where he was lying, and the cloth fell from his face. And then she said, filled with grief, "Picked up the cloth from your father and put it over his face again." The child picked it up and put it over her face again, and the king heard this in his sleep, and he let the cloth fall again. And then the little boy grew impatient and said, "Mother dear, how can I cover my father's face? I have no father in the world. I have learned to pray, 'Our Father, which art in heaven,' and you have said that my Father is in heaven and that he is our dear God. How can I know such a wild man? He is not my father." Hearing this, the king arose and asked who she was. And she said, "I am your wife, and this is your son," filled with grief. He saw her living hands and said, "My wife has silver hands." She answered, "Our merciful God has caused my natural hands to grow back." And the angel went into the other room, brought back the silver hands, and showed him to him. Now he was sure that it was his dear wife and his dear child, and he kissed them and rejoiced and said, "A heavy stone has fallen from my heart." And then the angel of God gave them all something to eat, and then they went back home to the old mother, and there was great joy everywhere, and the king and the queen conducted their wedding ceremony once again, and they lived happily ever after unto the blessed end. So this story, if I've read it sort of here and there, maybe I missed bits, but it came from this book. It's in this book. It didn't come from this book, but it's in this book. And this book is about the soul being split and shattered through child abuse of any sort, like sexual abuse and physical abuse and spiritual abuse and verbal abuse. And when that happens in childhood, it can take most of our lives to begin to work on ourselves, to reclaim that part of ourselves that's been lost or stolen or damaged and traumatized. And the way we do that is it's going to be through therapy, it's going to be through knowledge, and it's going to be through wisdom. It's going to be through sharing our story. It's going to be talking to people about it who get us, and it's going to be work. It's not a straightforward process. But having read that story, I saw for myself that at 14 and a half, I had to leave where I'd grown up, the house where I'd suffered years and years of abuse from being a really small little girl, and had my innocence completely taken away from me and my soul shattered. And, I didn't receive nurture or love. It was a very hard place where I grew up, and nobody listened to me. So then I went out into the world at 14 and a half, and I started working. And through those years, I met some nice friends, and I had lots of, I did have some fun and some joy, and I had a few boyfriends over the years, and was running my business, and I built it up to, quite a large turnover of money, employing 50 people. And I was, then I began to drink wine to bring, illusionary joy into my life. And then eventually the pain began to return because I was very lonely. I was literally, using alcohol and, reading books. And I stopped communicating with people that, my soul had been shattered, and I wasn't finding it in relationships, and I had no family to really go to because nobody acknowledged the extent of my wounding and my abuse that I went through, which was sexual abuse. I had nobody to turn to. So as an adult, my life began to fall to pieces. Like in the story, she met the king, she got married, lived, and then he had to go off to, war or whatever in this story. And then her life fell to bits again. And through thinking that she'd lost everything, she'd lost the king, she'd lost love, she was living in the forest on her own. She then began to grieve very, very deeply. And she accepted the fact that that was it, that was her lot, and she was on her own, and she was never going to have joy, probably. And then bit by bit, her hands grew back, bit by bit, her hands grew back. I don't know how that happened, but her hands grew back. And then through that, eventually, she came back to reclaiming her soul and having what she really wanted in her life. So the story there is that we can see her through trauma and grief, that we have to go through so much in order to really come home to ourselves and to embody or indwell and this in our bodies and have our soul return to us, that split soul from childhood. I hope that makes sense. I'm really tired actually right now. It's really late in London. It's sort of early hours of the morning, but I tried to get on YouTube earlier and it was giving me a lot of grief, and I really wanted to read it. So I'm glad I did. And whoever plays this back, I hope it's really useful. And whoever's watching, thank you for being there. And I'll be back tomorrow with some more stories or tales over the weekend anyway. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.